The scene opened on the magnificent architecture of a building, then zoomed in, focusing on a person clutching a piece of paper in their hand, grinding their teeth. Damn it. At that moment, he looked at the paper clearly, stating his rank as 30th out of 30. There's no reason to rank me last just because I can't use Serena. Rian thought, Dad will go crazy if he knows how I'm studying, and I even dare to ask to go out. Just then, a carriage approached. Elzine poked her head out and called out loudly, Rian, you didn't forget anything, did you? Rian startled, stammering, Yeah, I remember now. Elzine reminded from behind, About the vacation. Remember to bring your friend along. You got it? Shirone's name echoed in Rian's head. Then Rian wondered, What is Shirone doing? The scene shifts to a vacant lot where Shirone stands alone in the vast space, as if deep in thought. Shirone gasped softly. A burst of dazzling golden energy erupted. Accompanying this were streaks of light moving horizontally at breakneck speed, leaving behind trails of intensely bright yellow. Teleport. Shirone lunged forward amidst countless brilliant golden rays. It's as if he's moving through the area at the speed of light. Next is the skill of teleportation with a soft, curving form, radiating auras and brilliant seven-colored streams of light like a rainbow. That is the rainbow drop skill. A massive, rainbow-colored explosion erupted with devastating force. Shirone reached out her hands, preparing to cast a spell. Then, a brilliant yellow energy gathered in front of Shirone, forming a sphere of magic. Shirone shouted, Photon Cannon. Next, Shirone raised his hand high, magical energy surrounding it. Shirone said through gritted teeth, Lazy. A dazzling red laser beam shot out from Shirone's hand, tearing through space as it hurtled forward. Shirone thought to herself, no matter how strong material things may be, once subjected to the impact of a shockwave, then this powerful magic will eventually destroy it. Shirone thought to herself, the photon cannon has a stronger impact momentum. Shirone stood in the middle of the training ground, raised his hand to cast magic, and sighed softly, Whew. Then Shirone looked towards the large rock in front of him, where a dark red point of energy was gathering. He muttered, but the continuous damage from the laser can be maintained almost infinitely. Shirone unleashed a wind blade attack. Two sharp blades of wind shot forward, tearing through the air, creating streaks of bright blue light. Thwack! The wind blade struck its target, creating a dry, rasping sound. Shirone mused, This way, my forte magic has become much stronger in a short amount of time. However, he looked at the red apple in his hand, his voice thoughtful. I've learned that knowing only powerful magic isn't enough. I still have a long way to go. In her reminiscence, Shirone recalled, Before my magic was widely known, I could ambush people. A fleeting image, Arian unleashed her technique. Shirone continued thinking, and I can use the immortality function to compensate for my lack of precision. He concluded, but before those who are truly strong. The image of the Archmage Arcane, with his long, snow-white hair and fiery red eyes, emanated an all-encompassing aura of dark power. Then, the scene shifts to Thad and Elzine frantically running away from something terrifying. Shirone thought to herself, I couldn't do anything. He continued to recall, even when people died right before my eyes, I was helpless. On a day when the people most important to me were in danger. I don't want to become a weak wizard, unable to do anything. Shirone clenched the apple in her hand, resolute. That's why I... At that moment, Neid and Eruki waved to Shirone from afar, calling out, Hey, Shirone! Shirone looked up and replied with a smile, Eruki, Neid. But then Shirone suddenly froze, his eyes widening in surprise and anxiety. Horror, he exclaimed. Shirone was intensely focused, emitting a surge of light that enveloped the training grounds of the Alpia's Magic Academy. A blinding pillar of light suddenly erupted, engulfing Shirone and his two friends. Eruki and Neid stood watching. Eruki asked in surprise, Shiro, nay? Suddenly, Shirone appeared before Neid. Ooh, ooh. Neid's eyes widened in surprise. What is that? Instantaneous teleportation, Neid stammered. Eruki exclaimed joyfully, Unbelievable. You've trained to this level already? Shirone scratched her head and smiled shyly. I succeeded in moving at nearly the speed of light. Isn't that awesome? He thought to himself, but I'm so dizzy. Shirone continued, Well, this magic is useless because the distance it can move you is so short. Eruki's eyes widened. Why would you say that? Even upperclassmen have trouble with space-time magic. Neid still in shock, stammered, You surprised me, Neid. On the deserted training grounds of the Alpia's Academy of Magic, Neid smiled at Eruki and said, I have a surprise for you. Eruki nodded. Anyway, you've never seen plasma magic before, have you? I'll show you. Just then, Eruki chimed in, teasing Shirone. Are you indulging in your own narcissism in this empty training ground? Shirone stammered, That's not true. Then he lowered his head and told himself, I still have to try harder. He forced a strained response to his two friends. Eruki waved his hand, placed it on Shirone's shoulder, and said, No, you don't have to. Then he continued, his voice full of admiration, his laser magic. The use of monochromatic light is truly beyond imagination. Eruki continued to explain, that usually requires 10 years of arduous mental training to achieve. However, you did it easily by applying the principle of the Photon Cannon, Eruki added. Finally, Eruki patted Shirone on the shoulder and said, You can be completely proud of it. Neid stood nearby, nodding in agreement. Eruki smiled brightly. You've made the most outstanding progress this past semester. Shirone looked up at her two friends, responding with a smile. Yeah. Outside the Alpia's Academy of Magic, the morning sun shone upon the towering spire. In a room, Siena Olifer and Etella Romy stood with other teachers. Etella and Siena smiled. The students said in unison, Thank you, teachers, for teaching us this past semester. Inside the room, Shirone, Neid, and Eruki stood with the other students, with Thad standing in front of them. Thad crossed his arms and said with a smile, Ha ha, who would have thought the school's most problematic students would graduate like this? Neid laughed loudly, boasting, I'm really good at this kind of thing. A teacher standing beside him, pinching Eruki's ear, cheerfully said, The most amazing thing is that Eruki, the one no one had any expectations for, actually advanced a grade. Afterward, Thad met with Etella privately, saying softly, Miss Etella. Etella replied in surprise, Mr. Thad? Thad smiled brightly, surrounded by glittering light. We're on break now. Thad hesitated, his cheeks flushing. If you have time, would you like to have dinner together? Hearing that, Thad gaped in astonishment. The other students were no less surprised. Etella hastily waved her hand. I'm sorry, but I have some student council matters to handle. Thad woke up with a start, exclaiming, You're so strong. Then Thad confided, It would be great if I could join the student council too. Siena, hearing this, tilted her head and asked, Oh my God, is Mr. Thad also joining the student council? Thad said confidently, Who cares about hairstyles when you're in love? Siena replied, If you shave your head, no girl will like you. Thad, unwilling to give up, continued to taunt Siena. Of course, how could you understand since you've never loved anyone? Then Thad asked pointedly, You've never dated anyone, have you? At that moment, Siena froze for a few seconds, her eyes wide with astonishment. Shirone, Neid, and Eruki, standing behind her, also gaped in disbelief at what they had just heard. Neid stammered, Really? Really? Siena was flustered, hastily adjusted her glasses, and said hesitantly, I'm sorry, but... Then she raised her face, mustered all her courage, and declared, Right now, I'm dating. Hearing that, Thad and his three friends Shirone, Neid, and Eruki shouted in unison. What? Shirone could hardly believe his ears. He muttered, No way. What about Armin? Thad laughed loudly, stroking his chin as he said, Ha ha, you're a good joker. Then he pressed, So can you tell us that person's name? Siena licked her lips slightly, closed her eyes, and thought to herself, Magic, before boldly declaring, I'm dating with Magic. Thad and Shirone stood side by side, Thad raising a hand to stroke his chin in surprise. Shirone, on the other hand, gaped in astonishment. Then, from a high-angle view, we see Siena Olifer, Etella, Romy, Thad, Shirone, Neid, and Eruki standing in the middle of a large, spacious room. They all exclaimed, Ah, so that's how it is. From the doorway, Principal Alpius emerged, laughing loudly, and asked, What are you all doing here? Neid exclaimed with joy, Headmaster, you're still alive. Alpius smiled kindly and replied, I'm still the headmaster. Then he continued, Next semester, an interim principal will come to replace me. I hope you will treat him the same way you have treated me. Thad and some other students thought to themselves, It's time to go home, Neid disagreed, angrily saying, No, I don't want another principal. Alpius looked at Shirone and asked, Shirone, before you leave, could you spare some time for me? Shirone replied in surprise, Yes, of course. Neid and Eruki stood next to each other. Neid said, "We'll wait outside. Let's meet up once you're at the gate." Shirone nodded and replied, "Yes, I understand." In the room with rows of long tables and chairs, Shirone stood facing Alpiaz. Alpiaz looked at Shirone and asked, "You intend to investigate that matter, don't you?" Alpiaz Milch began the story about Miro. Shirone Arian looked up, her voice deepening. "As expected, you noticed." Alpiaz replied in a measured tone, "I've taken care of children for 40 years. I can tell everything just by looking into your eyes." Shirone lowered her head slightly and said with a hint of apology, "I'm sorry, but..." Alpiaz Milch gently interrupted Shirone. "Try investigating the Kurgo ruins." A flicker of surprise flashed in Shirone's eyes. Alpiaz continued, "If you look at that, you'll be able to get a basic understanding of the world Miro lives in." Shirone mused, Cargo. Shirone's eyes widened, and she exclaimed in astonishment, "Ruins, that thing." At the same time, from atop the magnificent carriage, Elzine Tess called out, "Rian," she anxiously asked, "do you remember where we're going?" In a magnificent carriage, Rian turned to Elzine and affirmed, "Of course there is. Who do you think I am?" Elzine crossed her arms, tilted her head, and asked, "Really? Where is it then?" From somewhere, Shirone piped up, eyes gleaming mischievously, "Galleon Island." Rian looked straight ahead, flashed a bright smile, and said, "Right?" Next is information about magical skills: laser, light magic attribute, photon type, active style, mental focus. The internal energy of a photon is amplified and focused, then fired as a beam. Normally, light is made up of many different wavelengths, but a laser concentrates those wavelengths into one and fires it as a thin, non-spreading beam of light. Following that is information about the spatial movement skill, a high-level magic that bends space-time to travel long distances while ignoring obstacles. This magic requires a complete understanding of near-light speed, and precise calculations of the starting and destination points are essential. Because the range of movement is limited to within a person's soul region, spatial movement must be used multiple times in succession to travel long distances. There is an inherent risk in moving without a full understanding of the surrounding space, and therefore using it in battle is impractical. When using spatial movement, the user will feel as though they have instantaneously moved from the starting point to the destination. Finally, information about Arian Shirone, along with his active and passive magical skills.